بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. So last week we talked about the two systems, right? It's the system of taqween and then the system of tashri', where the taqween, that is the physical, right, realm, and everything in taqween follows the amr of Allah, follows the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And then we have the system of tashri', right, which we are, right, the sharia, we are made responsible of that. And we connected that to the concept of tasbih, because Sūrah al-Ḥashr, it starts with sabbaha, right? And we spoke about the different meanings of tasbih. One is that, verbally a person says subhanallah. And then the second is that through resembling and through mimicking and mirroring the system of taqween, right? Because they're also like يسبحون كل في فلك يسبحون. They're all from the same root letter of sabaha. They're floating, right? They're following that system. Okay. So in today's section of the tafsir, right, we spoke, and Sheikh Amin, he expanded on, reluctantly, almost seemed reluctantly, that he was using the word economic theory, right? And understandably so. Okay. So since we spoke about how the system of tashri' has to mirror the taqweeni system, okay? So what that means is we take the method, or we take the model from that, right, from that realm, and then we implement that model over here on earth, right? That's why we have a problem as Muslims to take any theory that is developed by human beings, isolated from the guidance and revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and say that this is going to be a model of success, right? Because we don't take our models based off of purely human conjecture, right? We take our model based off of wahi, right? So that's why in Darul Qasim we always talk about wahi-based models, right? So now we see a glimpse of that in Sūrah al-Ḥashr, right? That when we take our quote-unquote economic theory, we base it off of our aqidah, right? And we base it off of the taqweeni system. And what is that? Lillahi mulku samawati wal ard. Right? Now, if you ask the common person, what does that mean? Like, for Allah is the dominion of the heavens and the earth, right? It's like everything belongs to Allah. It's like, well, what does that mean? He created the mountains, He created the skies, the oceans, all the animals belong to Allah. Everything that's there, it belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, that's at the taqweeni level. What does that mean at the tashri'i level? You understand the question? Right? That's how we applied it there in the taqweeni level, that okay, everything belongs to Allah, right? But now our job is to mirror that in the tashri'i system, right? And that's where you now see that Surah Hashr, it starts with the mention of tasbih for the taqweeni system, right? Sabbaha lillahi ma fi samawati wal ard. Everything in the heavens and the earth does the tasbih of Allah. It belongs to Allah, right? So then when you come to the economic factor, what that also means is what you own also belongs to Allah, right? What you own and what I own and what the community as a whole owns also belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So when we say we own something, what we really mean is we're kind of a channel, right? We're a channel through which the money flows. We're also a channel through which the murad and the amr of Allah flows, right? We're the channel through which, Allah executes His command. The channel through which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to establish the model that's based off of the taqweeni system on this earth, right? And in that model, who is the first one to be deputized? Okay, within the institution of insaniya, of humanity, who is institutionalized first? The Khalifa. Beautiful use of that word, right? The Khalifa. The Khalifa means what? Vicegerent, right? Vicegerent in one sense that you're taking that taqweeni nizam and now you're representing it on earth, right? So from within insaniya, the first, right, deputation goes to the institution of risala, right? The institution of messengership, of nubuwah, right? Why? Because the wahi is the connection between the takwini nizam and the tashri'i nizam, right? So the wahi is our connection to takwin, right? So how is lillahi mulku samawati wal ard supposed to be understood in the tashri'i? How are we supposed to implement that? How do we understand that? We understand that through the connection of nubuwwah and risala, right? So that's why in the ayah we see ma afa Allahu ala rasulihi, right? That what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave in terms of booty and game to who? Afa Allahu ala rasulihi, right? To his messenger, okay? And then the messenger, through the messenger, we're now deputized, okay? So Sūrah al-Ḥashr talks about how that wealth is supposed to be distributed, right? It comes to the messenger, and then there is, from the booty of the war, the gain that's accumulated and acquired, right? There's a section that is specifically for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? فَلِلَّهِ, it's for Allah, right? وَلِلرَّسُولِ, right? So notice that Allah is mentioned first, right? Because it's His to begin with. Then His messenger is deputized, right? وَلِذِي الْقُرْبَى وَالْيَتَامَى وَالْمَسَاكِينَ. And then categories of people that are in need, right? And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the end of the ayah, as Shaykh Amin mentioned, He mentions why is the system and why is the distribution this way, so that the money doesn't revolve just amongst the rich. And it was over here that Shaykh Amin, he made a very insightful point, and it's something that he makes a lot, right? Is that that's not the reason. Okay, what do I mean by that's not the reason? The reason for this setup is not simply because, okay, we don't want the money to just revolve amongst the rich. Okay, because once you say that, then it sounds like you're talking about socialism. Okay, well, what's the difference? Socialism has no connection to takwin, right? It's human conjecture. There's no God in that picture. There's no Allah in that picture, right? So what often happens, and we see this as Muslims, right, that have this apologetic mentality, right? We are often trying to fit Allah, the Deen, and the Rasul into pre-designated boxes, right? It's like the Prophet ﷺ was a humanitarian. Why do you feel the need to say that? You understand the question? Like, usually when we hear that he was a humanitarian, we're like, oh, someone's saying something really good, right? Okay, right? Or, I've heard this stated too. The Prophet ﷺ was the first feminist. Right? What are they trying to get at? Okay, what they're trying to get at is like, oh, these are good things, right? But what that means is that in your own thinking, Islam as a model to you is beneath other models, right? It occupies in your mind a level that needs to be made, it needs to be adjusted to other already present models, right? So as part of our implementation of this takwini model on earth, we first have to have this confidence in our own models, right? That we don't define our models based on pre-existent human conventions. Right? We present the model as, this is the model of lillahi mulku samawati wal ard. This is the model of our theology, because everything that we have is based on our model of theology, is based on our aqidah, right? So that was one very insightful point that Sheikh Amin mentioned, is that people seem somewhat impressed, and there seems to be like this swing back to this Marxist type of theory, right? Well, understandably so. You're seeing the vices of capitalism, right? So you're kind of going back and forth between these human conventions, right? But as a Muslim, we actually have something to offer people, that we have a better model, right? And this model is the model of lillahi mulku samawati wal ard. Okay, that we understand that anything that comes into quote unquote my possession, it's only my possession because Allah gave me deputization of it. Right? He deputized me to have it. But what that also means is that whoever Allah says I have to give it to, I have to give it to them. Right? So when Allah says 2.5 of quote unquote what is yours is actually mine, right? That's based on which model? That's based on the model of Sabbaha lillahi ma fi samawat. Right? Everything belongs to Allah. Right? Everything does His tasbih. So you have to follow that system. Okay? So this idea of distributing wealth, yes, it has the benefit of removing, right, this just circulation within the rich, right? And there are hikam, there are wisdoms that the system is bringing into play the murad of Allah, right? Yes.
So you're saying that we're actually trustees of, big wealth or.
That's what Khalifa means, right?
Right. Yeah. But so there is a benefit, I suppose, of protecting what's yours, which I think people protect more than saying I'm a trustee of something. Because the agency, right? It's like, well, somebody else's anyway, so I just don't want to get in trouble. There's a different level of care. So, I mean, we are responsible for taking care of what we have. I understand that. I mean, recognizing that, how do you balance that line of trusteeship? Even our kids, then we're trustees for our kids, right? In that train of thought. But by taking care of your progeny and your lineage, it's a different level of care.
I think that's
than taking care of an orphan, for example, which is also trusteeship.
I think that's the beauty of it. The beauty of it is, when you look at other systems, either it's like, it's not yours, period, right? Even the word is like, it's not yours, right? It's owned by someone else, right? But over here, when you look at the Sharia, we say you do have ownership. Allah gives you that, right? You're deputized to have ownership, right? But then there's guidelines that you have to follow because you don't have it intrinsically. That's the word that Sheikh Amin used, right? That our ownership of whatever we own is not intrinsic, it's given to us, right? So we must understand that since it's not intrinsic to us, when the one who gave it to us says, well, this part belongs there, we have to follow. Right? So what this does is this system now brings in the murad of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in different ways, right? It takes care of the needy, right? So you see these sifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they're now becoming manifest, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being ar-Razzaq, right? You see that system through the tashri'i system, you're now seeing the sifa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being implemented, okay? You see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-Qahar, He's the one who subjugates, right? He subjugates the disbelievers. So now, because of the strengthening of the Muslim Ummah as a whole, you now see that in the tashri'i system, that leads to the subjugation, right? We're talking about in the context of warfare, right? So the Muslim Ummah overtakes what the disbelievers had, of course, through legal sources, right? There's a legal justification for that warfare, okay? Right? That again goes back to the milki of Allah, right? Because it wasn't theirs, right? In reality, it's Allah. So when Allah says you can now take their wealth, meeting these parameters and guidelines, now it is legally yours, right? So again, over there, there's the manifestation of the sifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His attributes through the system of the Sharia, right? So now, just inshallah connecting it, because I do want to give some time for discussion, inshallah, right? Is that you see that Surah Hashr, it begins with, it's kind of like you're starting at a very macro scale, and then you come down from there, and then it keeps on getting smaller and smaller, right? So you have Sabbaha lillahi ma fi samawati wal ard, we're talking about purely taqween, okay? And then when we come to the booties of war coming, right? Now we're talking about it at a state level, right? Okay. And then Shaykh Amin, he mentioned this idea of وَمَا آتَاكُمُ الرَّسُولُ فَخُذُوهُ وَمَا نَهَاكُمْ عَنْهُ فَانْتَهُوا. In the context of this surah, this means that whatever the Prophet ﷺ gives you in terms of booty, right? In terms of the gain that you got from disbelievers, whatever you procured, take it, right? And the Prophet ﷺ gives you, 10 dirham, then that's yours. If he gives you 5,000 dirham, that's for you to take. But if he says this is not for you, then it's not for you. Okay. Now there's another side to this, or we shouldn't say a side, but there's perhaps an extension to this, right? And that extension is that now from the economic sector, we're going into the whole fiqh sector, right? That just as the Prophet ﷺ, within the system of tashri', he's the deputy for the distribution of wealth. He's also the deputy for the rest of tashri', right? So now today you have people, right, saying that, well, I'll take what's in the Quran, but why should I take hadith, right? Well, what happened? You have to trace the line of thought all the way back, right? Their mistake is in fact not in fiqh, it's not in usul, it's actually in not understanding aqidah, right? Because since everything belongs to Allah, He's the one who deputized the Prophet ﷺ, right? So once He deputized the Prophet ﷺ, then the Prophet ﷺ through that has authority, not just in distributing the wealth, because that's a very narrow framework of mind. I say, oh, He's deputized to distribute the money, but He's not deputized to implement and execute the Sharia. No, of course He is, right? So when someone says, well, you have to show it to me in the Quran, or I'm not following it, right? He says, okay, you actually haven't understood the Quran, and more than that, you don't have the necessary framework of aqidah to understand the Quran. Right? Okay? So we went from the takwini to the tashri'i at the level of the economics. Then we went to the fiqhi, right? That's within sharia, tashri'i, right? And then, subhanAllah, Allah SWT says, وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ إِنَّ اللَّهَ شَدِيدُ الْعِقَابِ. Right? That a person within the system of tashri' could be doing everything right. Right? So outwardly, if you're thinking of things in orbit, right? So it's like, okay, you have the takwini orbit, you have the tashri' orbit. The person in terms of the community seems to be in the right orbit. He's coming to the masjid, they're giving zakah, they're doing what they need to, right? So that's like the physical body. The body is where it needs to be, right? But where's taqwa, right? In the famous hadith, at-taqwa ha-huna yushiru ila sadrihi thalath, right? He points to his heart 3 times, right? And that's why Imam al-Ghazali, rahimahullah, he says that a person's most immediate, and the word he uses is really interesting, mulk, right? Where have you been given deputization of milkiyah is your heart, right? So if you look at the beauty of Sūrah al-Ḥashr, right, look at the different levels it goes through, right? Okay, a person may be doing everything right in terms of there, but if the taqwa is not here, then this heart's not doing tasbih, right? So this also has to be subjugated to that, right? Wattaqullah, right? Just like outwardly in your interactions with people, you also have to be doing tasbih in terms of you're following the pattern and the system that's been set there. Your heart also has to do the same, right? So wattaqullah inna Allah shadidul iqab. Right? So I'll stop there, inshallah, and then if there's any questions and discussions, we can take it from there, inshallah. Farouk, you had some questions even before, mashallah.
Right. So I think within the mulk that Allah, that's His. I was reflecting that I think the Prophet ﷺ also showed us not just the economic system, but also the realm of the spiritual system too, right? The metaphysical, and that protected the community and actually could put barak in the work that the community was doing, and individuals too. In fact, people used to be in awe of Muslims. That's clearly not the case anymore. And so, I was just reflecting, where did this change? Is this just a natural degradation that just happens because a lot of societies just kind of lose their purpose, which is the normal part of human history? And number 2, is this even reversible? given that things is predetermined to lead towards the day of judgment. And so, just like you don't ask for world peace, it's not going to happen because it's the fitna of the world. So I wanted to get your perspective on it within Sūrah al-Ḥashr, which is really reflecting a lot more on the metaphysical powers we have.
Yes, very nice. Okay, so I think, Brother Farouk, you mentioned something really nice, that the spiritual aspects, like the tasbih itself, right? Those spiritual actions, they have an impact, right? And can we associate or attribute some of what we see in the ummah as a result of, or we can call it a negative impact, for the purpose of losing out or forsaking those spiritual practices, right? Such as tasbih. Yes, we absolutely can, right? And it's one of the things that we were actually discussing even before, is that there may still be righteous people, right? But when the majority is involved in something else, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاتَّقُوا فِتْنَةً لَا تُصِيبَنَّ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا مِنْكُمْ خَاصَّةً. That be aware of the fitna that is going to afflict not only the oppressors, right? It won't be specific to just the oppressors. Okay, so that's a very impactful ayah, right? It is not لا تصيبن الذين ظلموا منكم خاصة. It's not going to be only for the oppressors. Okay, so now as terms of, okay, what's the point? Okay, so again we go back to the same model, right? There is a hikmah of why things are happening the way they are, right? There's always going to be highs and lows and highs and lows, right? What we see is that, historically speaking, right, scholars say that perhaps an exception to this rule is the Khilafah of Umar bin Abdul Aziz, right? Where usually, like if you're thinking of a chart, right, you have a high and you have a low. Then the next high is not as high as the previous high. See what I'm saying? Right? Like the ummah goes to a certain extent,
Right.
it goes low, then there's another high, right? There's like this tajattu, it rises again.
Small bumps in
Right?
trajectory.
But the rise is never as high as the previous rise. Okay? Like I said, an exception to that was perhaps the Khilafah of Umar bin Abdul Aziz. Right? But now this is also part of the murad of Allah. Right? That's part, there's a hikmah. We may not understand the hikmah. Right? But we do know that towards the end of time, right, that's going to happen again. Right? Okay, so now something that I've heard from Sheikh Amin and many other scholars, right, is that sometimes you have, mashallah, people that are they're young guys, mashallah, they're very, mashallah, passionate. It's like, I wish I'm there when the Dajjal comes, because I want to fight the Dajjal. It's like, relax, man. Your job is not to hasten the coming of the Dajjal. You don't want to be there when Imam Mahdi comes, right? So when we think of in terms of this system, right, since we already know what's going to happen, right, our job is to try to delay the coming of the Mahdi as much as we can, right? That's our form of reversal, right? So our reversal is, okay, we're not going to go back all the way there, right? And we know things are going to get bad, right? Eventually, after you hit rock bottom, there's going to be like a rise, okay? But our job, for us to contextualize what we're doing over here now, our job is to delay the coming of the Mahdi, right? Because the Mahdi is not going to come until things get much worse than they are, right? Perhaps it's difficult for us to conceive that things could get much worse, right? But if you look at the hadith and things, it's going to get worse, right? So our job is to delay that, and that's through the institution of amr bil ma'ruf and nahi anil munkar, to enjoin good and forbid evil, right? And that occurs at different levels, right? And institutions such as the Qasim does that at the level of producing academic papers, right? That's going to now instill within the larger community, right, what we understand to be Islamic civilizational values, right? So that's amr bil ma'ruf at the level of the mainstream community, right? Someone that's in a position of statehood or leadership of a state, they implement it at a different level. an individual Muslim, right, can contribute to that through different ways, right? Their own family, their extended family, supporting institutions, right? Supporting, and learning Islam, right? Things that are now, or other institutions that are doing the job of Amr bil Ma'ruf, you become their help and you become their aid, right? So I think that kind of speaks to, like, what does reversal look like for us? I think this is what reversal looks like.
That's a good question. I think we have about 5 minutes left, but I
Yeah.
had one follow on, which is you mentioned earlier sort of the lack of completeness or sort of lacking in general of man-made models because they're not grounded in the Tashri'i model, or in Allah, basically grounded in Aqidah and Allah's path. So previously, one of the things that we've mentioned is the importance of translating the message into the language of the people. So the question that I had was, like, how do we balance the superiority of Islamic models versus communication of those models in the language of the people to effectively convey the message, right? That concept of like diet versus 1/3 of your stomach should be empty.
Right, subhanAllah. That's the way you put it is exactly, if I said, like, this is basically the mission of the Qasim, right?
Right. And I think specifically when you mentioned like, Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was a feminist, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Right? Like, there's two sides to that.
Right.
One, which is like, that's very incomplete.
Yes.
The other side is this person only understands, like, their worldview considers that to be a very high value, for example.
Yeah.
So, and there's probably a nuanced answer here, but the question was in that line of like, okay, well,
how do we present it?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So we present it, number one, by we adopt the model that there are human values, right, that are agreed upon by everyone, right? So there are things that our Sharia brings that are agreed upon by all people that have a normal sense of fitrah, right? So we proliferate and we disseminate these values, right? Okay. And then at the same time, right, we call towards higher values, right? And that comes in various forms, right? But when we say we want to present it in a way that people will understand, is that we will take human values that people already gravitate to, right? And we model and we present, or we wrap that value, right, by joining it to these human values, right? For example, you want to talk about, like, okay, well, justice, okay, you say, okay, justice, there should be justice, right? But then you tie it to a higher value. You look, well, who is the most just, right? It's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so sure, we agree with you that we want justice on earth, right? But now we're taking them and elevating them to a higher plane. Is that, okay, well, now how are we going to define justice? There may be aspects of justice that we're all in agreement upon, right? But what's the source of justice, right? Who defines ultimately where justice comes from, right? Where does our sense of justice come from, right? So you now bring that into the discussion as well. So now you're taking that human discussion, right, which is perhaps fitri, right? And you can even say, well, where does your fitrah come from, right? So you now take that discussion and you elevate it to the level of theology, right? And when you elevate it to the level of theology, right, it's like, okay, well, I understand this human part, I'm with you. Okay, well, now maybe it makes sense that, okay, well, where is it coming from, right? So you take human ethics and you tie it to a wahi-based model of ethics, right? And that's where you start getting this da'wah initiative, right? Then once we do that and we present such a model, like, oh, okay, this is what Amr bil Ma'ruf looks like. Does that kind of answer what you're?
It does, yeah. And I think it opens up the door to this other question, which is in a society, civilization, where the value of God and the sort of clarity of belief in God is at such a sort of low point, right? Generally accepted. that you almost need to back up a few more steps, right? And start with, deeper like fitra and trying to reconnect people with recognition of the superior being, the creator. And I think that that's an interesting way to kind of frame it and move backwards. But yes, it helps.
That's very interesting.
Sorry,
1 minute, inshallah. Right? There's a hadith that talks about the fitan that come towards the end and how iman will be removed from the hearts. What's very interesting in that hadith is that it first mentions that the hearts had amana, right? It had the quality of trust, right? Trustworthiness. And it was upon those hearts that had trustworthiness, that iman was revealed. Iman comes down when a heart first has the quality of trustworthiness, right? And then the sign of iman leaving is that people's amana also decreases, right? Just like till the point you won't find anyone in a whole village that has any trustworthiness, right? That's kind of what you were mentioning, right? That you have to go back to these basic models, these basic concepts, right? So I always find that hadith interesting and how it kind of connects to this discussion of ours. Inshallah, subhanallah bihamdihi, subhanakallahumma bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.